accountability. A CEO does not get to claim ignorance, and they certainly do not get to be a bystander. The buck stops with the CEO. Rather than transforming what he claims was a, quote, conspiracy culture, Stalf did the opposite. He condoned and actively participated in behavior that betrayed everything that Columbus Zoo stands for. For 3,650 days as the CEO of the Columbus Zoo, Stalf had opportunities to right the ship of corruption, deception, and intimidation. Instead, every day he made the decision, the choice, to stay on course and remain an active player in this ring of corruption. The theft of zoo funds and misuse of zoo property, tampering with records, conspiracy, fraud, these were not victimless crimes. The collusion by Stalf and his co-conspirators were factors in the zoo losing its accreditation from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums for a year. The AZA Accreditation Committee cited multiple reasons denying the zoo's accreditation. Some include illegal financial practices and an environment of bullying and silencing staff by former leadership. Losing our accreditation for a year devastated key programs aimed at saving endangered species and stripped colleagues, lifelong conservationists, of leadership roles they spent their careers building. The Columbus Zoo lost its professional standing within the zoo community. Beyond the financial toll, the culture of fear, mistrust, and bullying that Tom Stalf perpetuated left feelings of pain in our organization, and we're still working to heal. The very fabric of what makes a Columbus Zoo great was attacked by the selfishness and greed of a man who was entrusted with the highest authority. To add insult to injury, Stalf's apology feels half-hearted. True contrition does not deflect blame. It takes full ownership, especially when you're the CEO leading the way. But instead of accountability, Stalf shifts blame, even going so far as to target Jack Hanna, a man with Alzheimer's who cannot defend himself, in an attempt to tarnish Jack's reputation and that of his family. These past years, our leadership has invested countless hours rebuilding what was broken. We've regained our AZA accreditation and have implemented new governance and financial policies to ensure that this never happens again. We are working tirelessly to rebuild morale and trust among our teams, donors, and the community. And we are proud to say that we're making progress. However, trust and healing takes time, and rebuilding our reputation in the eyes of the public will take time. Tom Stalf admitted to crimes that stretched over a decade, and now he's asking the court to delay paying restitution after he gets out of prison. Your Honor, we humbly request you order him to pay these monies to the zoo now, not years from now. Today we ask for justice, Your Honor, not just for the financial crimes committed, but for the profound betrayal of trust by Tom Stalf, a man who held the highest position of authority within our organization. The consequences for these actions need to mirror the depth of damage inflicted, and his sentence should serve as a reminder that deceit and betrayal will not be tolerated. We trust in your judgment to deliver justice that fully acknowledges the far-reaching impact of Tom Stalf's actions, not just with the Columbus Zoo, but on the broader community that trusted in him. Thank you again, Your Honor, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes. Judge, as you know, while I may be the lead prosecutor in this case, I'm accompanied by some able-bodied prosecutors and investigators or agents who are sitting with me at the trial table, who the record should reflect Marissa Gibson, Derek Wood, and Sam Kirk were the trial team in this entire fiasco. Judge, whoever commits a fraud is guilty not only of not only of the particular injury to whom he deceived, but of the diminution of that confidence which constitutes not only the ease but the existence of society. You commit the fraud not only against a particular victim, but against the society as a whole. And the fraud wrecks any confidence that the society may have. Like in this case, that the tax dollars or the donor dollars are being properly spent. For too long, the victims of crime have been the forgotten people in our criminal justice system. Rarely do we give victims the help they need or attention they deserve. Yet the protection of our citizens to guard them from becoming victims is the primary purpose of our penal laws. Thus, each new victim personally represents an instance in which our system has failed to prevent crime. Lack of concern for victims compounds that failure. That was a quote, Your Honor, from Ronald Wilson Reagan shortly before he became a crime victim in March of 1981. Judge Tom Stalf committed crimes against many victims: the taxpayers of Franklin County, the taxpayers of the state of Ohio, the Columbus Zoo. A vast majority of the money stolen was stolen from the zoo, as you know. And who makes up the zoo? The employees, the volunteers, the donors, the people who donated money to the zoo, the community as a whole. Each suffered, Judge, as a result of the defendant's conduct. And while I'm sure you will hear that this will never happen again, Judge, this is the first time it happened, and when it did, the defendant hit the white-collar crime jackpot. The state of Ohio, Your Honor, is concerned for all that Tom Stalf victimized. Stalf and his gang, concerned that justice be served so that crimes committed by this defendant are fairly and adequately punished. As you know, Judge, on a prior day, the defendant took responsibility for his conduct and entered a plea of 15 felonies. He had time to reflect, to think about his guilty plea before he met with the PSI people, the probation department, when he made the following comment: I became involved in these offenses by approving contracts that involved event tickets. I attended some events. I approved invoices for events that I attended and from events that others attended. I did not pay taxes on a safari trip. Actually, it was a cruise that I was asked to attend and work. It was a party cruise conducted by WBNS and the dispatch. I also emailed certain staff about events. I agreed to plan that event tickets. I understand that I made bad decisions and truly sorry for my mistakes, poor judgment, and my activity. The truth of the matter is, Judge, is uncovered by Marissa Gibson and Matt Kopecki on our team, is that it was incumbent upon the defendant to make sure that tax dollars and all the donor dollars were properly spent. That Charles Logan's bequeath and Frank Stamp's donation, the tax dollars paid by hardworking Franklin County taxpayers like Joe the Barber or Sam the Butcher, funds that he was entrusted with, do not get spent on Florida condos. Concert after concert after concert at Nationwide Arena, event after event after event, like Buckeye Superfest, stripping hundreds of thousands of dollars away from the zoo. Judge, the zoo was not to be the avenue by which the defendant could get courtside seats from a zoo vendor for a championship game involving the Cleveland Cavaliers during their championship season, or for free plane rides to sporting events from that same zoo vendor, or the avenue by which a shady change order gets approved after the vendor needed money. I would expect, Your Honor, the defendant to stand up to the probation officer and say, I'm Tom Stalf. I led and I permitted an atmosphere of thievery to reign supreme at the Columbus Zoo, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars so that I could help myself, my family, and my friends. I was the CEO of the Columbus Zoo, and I thought I could do whatever I wanted, disregarding all that I was supposed to protect. I should have put a stop to the thievery, but instead I allowed it to exist. I played a huge role in the thievery. That's what I would have expected, Your Honor. We didn't see the defendant take full responsibility for what he's done and admit, fall on the sword, like Tracy Murnane and Greg Bell did. We didn't see that, Judge. Tom Stalf made over $300,000 as CEO of the Columbus Zoo annually. I think in his last year he was the CEO. Yet he found it necessary and important to lead a criminal enterprise that ran a zoo. Now, as you know, Judge, the defendant pled guilty to two felonies of the second degree, theft and conspiracy to engage in a pattern of corrupt activity. The conspiracy involved a criminal enterprise, the most serious white-collar crime a person can commit. There's a presumption, Judge, as you know, the defendant received a prison sentence for these offenses. And these offenses are not allied offenses. They are separate offenses. The defendant pled guilty to 3 felonies of the third degree, for which no presumption for prison and community-controlled sanctions exists. The defendant pled guilty to 5 felonies of the fourth degree and 5 felonies of the third degree, for which, of course, there is a presumption of community-controlled sanctions. The defendant, Your Honor, was the first of the high-ranking officials to be interviewed in this case. He was first to be interviewed by Porter Wright, the law firm representing the zoo, with attorneys present, not the attorneys who represent the defendant today. The meeting notes indicated that while the defendant agreed that some of his behavior was not proper, for example, having the zoo pay for his son's basketball team trip to an Ohio State basketball game, he also agreed that a trip to Put-in-Bay using the zoo RV was probably not a good idea. The meeting notes indicate that he was confrontational, lacked remorse, and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. He chose to hold the belief that he was being targeted. A couple of days later, he resigned. He was interviewed by agents of the state of Ohio in the Ohio Attorney General's office, charitable law section. In the meeting at charitable law, the defendant had the opportunity to come clean. This was in October of 2021, before special prosecutions and the auditor's office took over the investigation, to tell his side of the story, his version of events, Your Honor. But he lied. He lied about the RV purchase. We all know it wasn't a legitimate purchase, but he said it was. He accurately, however, did portray Pete Fingerhut as deceptive, and he accurately said that Pete Fingerhut bought Columbus Blue Jackets tickets. He also accurately stated that Pete Fingerhut was altering and forging documents, but he failed to admit that he was in on it. He also failed to fire Pete Fingerhut when he learned what Pete Fingerhut was doing, because he was doing the same thing. Maybe not altering documents, but he was benefiting from the same things that Pete Fingerhut benefited from. He accurately stated that and portrayed Greg Bell's nepotism. Bell hiring 2 sons, renting a house that the zoo owned to his daughter. But he went along with it. He allowed it to happen. He didn't say no. He lied about the zoo rental property that he moved his in-laws into. He did accurately state that the zoo spent money on the property, but he misrepresented what his aging father-in-law did on the property. And that was complete. His lies were came completely clean or clear after the state auditor's office investigated the money that was spent on that property. Judge, the presumption of prison for the 2 felonies of the second degree can only be overcome if the defendant can show that community-controlled sanctions would not demean the seriousness of the offenses, and if the conduct was less than conduct normally would be constituting the offenses. The defendant can't show that. When we look at 2929B, Your Honor, the more serious factors, the defendant hits on every one he could possibly hit on. The zoo suffered serious economic harm. The defendant had a position of trust in the community, and that offense related, and the offenses that he committed related to that position. The defendant's occupation obliged him, Judge, to prevent these offenses from occurring. His occupation was used to facilitate the offenses. The relationship with the zoo facilitated the offenses. He was the CEO of the zoo. The defendant committed the offenses as part of organized criminal conduct. All those factors, Judge, outweigh any less seriousness factors. And by the way, when you look at the less seriousness factors, the zoo didn't facilitate these offenses. The zoo didn't say, hey, CEO, help steal $2.4 million from us. The defendant was not provoked into committing these crimes except by his own greed and ego. It's true there's no physical harm here, Your Honor, but this isn't a physical harm case. There's zero grounds to mitigate the defendant's conduct here, Your Honor. So, Judge, when the factors in 29-29-12 are balanced, it really isn't even a close call. The conduct here is more serious than normally constitutes the offense, and that the presumption of prison for the two felons of the second degree cannot be overcome. Judge, we recognize the defendant has no prior record. We recognize that these crimes were not committed when the defendant was on bond. But we do not agree that these crimes are not likely to occur again. The defendant works in a white-collar job currently, where he has access to money, Judge. The aim of criminal law is the maintenance of legal order. Faith in our justice system is only enhanced when one who committed these acts, when one who stole from the Columbus Zoo, receives a prison sentence, Judge. When the civil case was settled involving the defendant, he couldn't even pay his own restitution. He had to get money from Germain Motors to do it. The guidelines, Your Honor, call for the defendant to be sentenced to prison. The state calls for the defendant to be sentenced to prison. The victims call for it. We cannot allow the CEO of an organization such as the Columbus Zoo, a non-profit, a charity, to be ripped off, and then those who did the ripping off escape a visit to the Ohio Department of Corrections. Judge, the state of Ohio urges you to sentence the defendant to prison for the offenses he has pled guilty to. Thank you.
I see. Thank you. Mr. Collins?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please.
Thank you very much. May it please the court, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Stalf, the government. Your Honor, first and foremost, we thank you for allowing us to file a sentencing memorandum. I know the court reads those very closely. I've reviewed the PSI, Your Honor, and those aspects. And I know the court reads our sentencing memorandum very closely, Your Honor, because the court understands that as Tom Stalf sits there right now, he understands he's going to prison. In our sentencing memorandum, we acknowledge that. We're not arguing the factors. I'm not sure if the government had time to read our sentencing memorandum, but he's taking responsibility for 15 pleas, Your Honor, and he is going to prison, and he knows that. We ask that you treat him in a commensurate with the other people involved in this case, Your Honor. And it is a conspiracy, and we do believe that we ask for a sentence similar to Greg Bell's, if not slightly more, but less than 4 years and 11 months in prison. To give the court some perspective, Your Honor, I want to go over some of the things that Mr. Caceres said, as well as what was in his sentencing memorandum, just to give the court the full picture. These are not meant as excuses. These are not meant to justify any action that my client took, because my client was a CEO. He embraced the culture was there when he started. He encouraged it. He enriched himself as well as his family friends, and he's pled guilty for that, Your Honor. In this situation, Your Honor, he first became associated with the zoo when he worked with Mr. Hanna. He worked with Mr. Hanna when he would go on the late-night shows with David Letterman, and he would travel with the zoo animals. Based on their relationship, Mr. Hanna hired him, Your Honor, in 2010. He started as a COO, and he actually was in charge of the Wilds. At that point in time, the Wilds was bankrupt, basically. They were going to shut it down. Tom did a turnaround of over $1 million, Your Honor, and in 8 months, it was up and running and profitable. In 2013, Your Honor, he became CEO. And at that point in time, Your Honor, the government argues in their sentencing memorandum that they could find no wrongdoing at the zoo prior to 2013. That's simply untrue and a mistaken characterization by the government. The barter system that was in place, Your Honor, the things that were going on when my client started there in 2010, started there long before that, Your Honor. The houses, the perks, so to speak, the non-payment of taxes, the barter system and the employee recognition dinners and things of that nature were already in place, Your Honor. Did my client have a duty and a fiduciary duty to stop that? Yes. Instead, he was selfish and greedy and perpetuated it. But please understand, Your Honor, the proper perspective, these were things that were ongoing at the zoo because the zoo didn't have the proper safeguards in place. In this situation, Your Honor, my client had a duty and should have stopped it and didn't, Your Honor. In the government's sentencing memorandum, Your Honor, they talk about the barter system, but what no one talks about in this case is how it actually works. My client has agreed to pay full restitution, Your Honor. In the barter system, if you pay $2,000 for tickets, you only pay $200, Your Honor, to the barter system. And then your barter account gets debited and credited a certain way. So the actual loss that the zoo writes a check for is that 10%. Now, the marginal utility values of those accounts can come into play, but the account was never less than $100,000 of barter value, Your Honor. At times, it was as high as $400,000. At the end of each year, the auditors and the finance committees and all the committees associated would determine an amount to write off. So when we're talking about that amount, Tom said, I'm not fighting restitution. I'm not. I will pay the full value of whatever they think it is. And that's what he's agreed to do, Your Honor. So when they talk about these tickets and all the things of that nature, it's not the actual value that he's paying, but he's doing that to take responsibility. He's doing that because, Your Honor, good people sometimes do bad things. Good people without records who are successful in their careers sometimes do bad things. And Tom Stalf did criminal activity, and he's trying to make remedies to it. He's trying to take responsibility for that, Your Honor. Second thing, Your Honor, with regards to the government's sentencing memorandum. Your Honor, there was employee recognition dinners before my client ever got there. It was the 400 or 500 people would be there. Every single employee there, Your Honor, would receive a gift, and most of the gifts came from the barter system. Some of them were motorized bikes. Some of them were expensive. Not one person was handed a 1099. Not one person was given anything because they didn't know they were supposed to. Everybody was basically stupid to that reason, Your Honor. From that, Your Honor, he realized when he first met with myself, when he first met with Mr. O'Brien, and more importantly, when he met with his CPA, Your Honor, that those are illegal things. You have to pay tax on those. But that was the culture at the zoo before he got there, and he continued that. He absolutely did, and he's guilty of that. Your Honor, with regards to the condo, Your Honor, that's referenced there, this was not a vacation, Your Honor. He was sent to Florida to visit 4 sites by Jack Hanna. As part of that, he decided to take his family. He wrote a check for airplane tickets for his family. He had booked a condo. Last minute, a new condo becomes available. And again, it was bigger. Yes, they paid the 10%. You couldn't cancel the other one. So this wasn't taking your family on a vacation. He was working, and his family came along. Tom Stalf has now paid the taxes on those trips. He's paid it, and we appreciate the auditor's office pointing that out. He immediately wrote a check and has paid the federal government, the state government, all taxes they're owed on the initial $400,000 restitution, Your Honor, as well as the trips and the value that he received for the tickets. All of that has been paid. We submitted that in our sentencing memorandum. Your Honor, with regards to the tickets and the Blue Jackets and the Ohio State, again, to give you the full picture, was there a plan put in place to sign up for the Blue Jackets suite? Absolutely. Is my client aware of it? Yes. It was pitched to him by the team. He agreed to it. He signed the documents. That goes to the finance committee. It goes to the audit committee. It goes all through the financials. It's a large chunk of money. It's visible in there. Now, did he enrich himself? Absolutely. Did he use it personally and cover it up with a credit card that said for promotional things? Yes. That he's guilty of. But to put in perspective, Your Honor, there's approximately 42 to 44 home games for the Blue Jackets. They had those seats for 8 years. He used them about 6 times, Your Honor. Those are the 6 times that they put in their sentencing memorandum. The same with Ohio State. The Ohio State tickets were in place before my client ever worked there. People used them and didn't pay for them before my client ever worked there. Did my client go to Ohio State games and take his son there? Absolutely. And he admitted to that, Your Honor. And he went in there. And he went over the years for Ohio State to approximately 7 basketball games that they talk about. Now, I apologize to the court for being naive. I apologize for being not the brightest person. But the RV, Your Honor, the RV keeps coming up and keeps coming up. Paid that restitution in the $400,000 that he paid. But the RV, Your Honor, my client was authorized by the board up to spend about $200,000 without board approval. That's the leeway that he had with that. There was an idea that at the zoo, the music performers needed a place to stay ahead of time. He and Tracy Bernan and others talked about getting an RV. He signed for the RV. He bought the RV. They went online. It goes to the finance committee, goes to the audit committee. Everybody at the zoo knows they have an RV, including the board, including the president. Now, with that RV, Your Honor, They were going to then keep it at the wilds, but because there was wildlife there and critters, they moved it then to Westerville, Mr. Murnane's spot that the zoo owned in there. That's where it was kept. When there was a project there being paved, it was moved to my client's house for 2 weeks. My client, Your Honor, didn't know how to work the RV. He didn't know the systems. Tracy Murnane invited him to Put-in Bay because Tracy Murnane had an RV at Put-in Bay at a place. He goes, I'll reserve you the spot next to me. He reserved it. Come up and we'll see if it's used. We'll see what it is. Tom, his wife, and one child went there to Put-in Bay, hooked the stuff up. It was about an hour later they said, this is a piece of crap. The RV is a piece of crap. They bought it for $47,000. He then, after that, immediately sold it for $41,000, a loss of $6,000. Now, it's a business decision. Did he travel the country with it, stuff like that? No. Is he guilty of his wife and son being and taking it up there and enriching them? Absolutely. And that's what he's pleading guilty to, Your Honor. He's paid taxes on the travel. Your Honor, the culture and environment with the house on Frobisher that the government mentions in their sentencing memorandum, that house was left to the zoo when someone passed away. That happens frequently. The house that Jack Hanna lived in when he retired, the same concept came through. The zoo put in $250,000, Your Honor, into that house where Mr. Hanna lived. At the time when this house came to him, Greg Bell's daughter was living in the house next door to Jack Hanna's and paying rent. Other people determine the rent, Your Honor. The CEO doesn't determine the rent. When this house came through, my client went with a realtor and walked through it. It was uninhabitable. It couldn't be, and they couldn't sell it in that shape as well. The purpose was to fix it up and sell it. When they had offers and they had estimates, Your Honor, it came through, it needed quite a bit of work. My client's father-in-law was quite handy, Your Honor. In that situation, they asked to move in. What's frustrating, Your Honor, is the president of the board for the Columbus Zoo, when that happened, did the title work. He did the deed work. He had understood that what the rent my client's father-in-law was going to pay. That was a known thing. Greg Bell set the price. Greg Bell set that. In exchange for the reduced rate, my client's father-in-law had to do some self-repairs. Now, for the government to stand here and say that he didn't do anything is just disingenuous, Your Honor. They weren't there. They didn't go through the details with it, nor did the auditor's office, Your Honor. So repairs were made. The bottom line is they sold the house, Your Honor, for $267,000. Whether you believe 80 was put into it by the zoo or what have you, they turned a profit. That was the purpose of that house. And they gained $900 a month from my client's father-in-law during rent. Now, we paid that restitution, the difference between that and other houses in that area, what could have been rented, and he paid it. He chose to pay that restitution, Your Honor, because he's taking responsibility. He didn't fight about it. He didn't go after it. He didn't want to have a contested hearing with you. He paid it, Your Honor. Your Honor, there are reasonable things and positive things that Tom Stalf did as CEO. He turned around the wilds when he was COO, Your Honor. In this situation, Your Honor, every single year that he was CEO, attendance went up, revenues went up, donor revenue went up, donor revenue group reservation sales went up. Group sales, based on the marketing plan in 1 year alone, Your Honor, increased over $1 million. That concept was working, but that same concept is what allowed them to enrich themselves, and no one would know about it. And he's guilty of that, and that's what he pled guilty to, Your Honor. In that situation, Your Honor, in the pandemic here, the zoo was budgeted to lose $32 million. Tom Stalf, because of his leadership, because of the positive things he did as a good person in that situation, Your Honor, brought it in as a profit of $4.6 million. It's a $36 million turnaround during there. He had his boots on the ground, and he was working, Your Honor. He wasn't out gallivanting, using free gifts 365 days a year. Is he guilty of violating his fiduciary duty, violating the trust of the community, violating the trust of his employees and friends, and violating and making victims of his family members? Absolutely. He's going to prison because he's guilty of those things today, and he acknowledges that, Your Honor. I'd be remiss, and I know the court read in my sentencing memorandum about restitution, but the dollar amount is very difficult to calculate. I understand that, and that's what's been the difficult thing that I've lived with for the past 3 years that I've been associated with this case. But, Your Honor, when after Porter Wright does an investigation, the zoo pays them. After the zoo pays Plant Moran to do an audit, a number was reached of $400,000. Full and complete, both known and unknown. It's signed, the payment is made. The restitution payment is made. Not once in the history of criminal law that I've been doing for 32 years has anybody asked, where did you get the money? How did you get the money? The restitution is ordered and it was paid. There was an agreement and it was paid, Your Honor, in advance. There was no civil suit. There was nothing filed because he tried to take responsibility at that time, Your Honor, the $400,000. Now, again, when you sit down with Tom Stalf, he's an intelligent person. He did wrong. But when you say, Tom, you don't have to pay any more. When the governor asked for another $315,372, he said, I'm paying it. I'll do whatever it takes to full and complete value. Okay, there's a legal argument, as the court would know, that it was a full and complete release, Your Honor, of both known and unknown, Your Honor, of potential restitution. So, does he have a plan to repay the $315? Absolutely, Your Honor. It's in place. And the reason we're asking for a stay on the interest and the order to take effect once he's released from prison is because he's going to prison. And we don't have people that go to prison pay restitution during there. Now, there's a plan in place to try to sell different parcels of property to make the zoo whole as soon as possible, Your Honor. We were about 2 to 3 months away from that, and Tom said, no, I'm not asking for a continuance to do that. I'll do my time in prison, pay my debt to society, come out and pay the restitution. There is a plan in place, Your Honor, and it will be paid. Now, in a conspiracy, Your Honor, we ask to be commensurate with Mr. Bell and with Mr. Fingerhut when you do that, Your Honor, only because that's how conspiracy works. Mr. Stalf, Tom did not know that Fingerhut was extorting people. He did not know that he was committing that act. He did not know that Greg Bell was taking cash, was paying for his son's trips, not work-related or anything, out of his zoo credit card. Didn't know those things, but that you don't need to in a conspiracy, as the court knows. But to differentiate the three of them is difficult, Your Honor. That's why we ask that you treat them commensurate, you treat them similarly. That's what happens with a conspiracy. It can't work without one. It can't work unless the CEO covers that part up. It can't work unless the invoices that come in are falsified by Fingerhut. They have to be signed by him. And he signed them. And that's what he's guilty of, Your Honor. And he pled guilty to that. But it can't work without the three of them each doing their individual parts. The government has a vast amount of power, Your Honor. The government decides who they want to work with and who they don't. When Mr. Caceres got involved with the case, the first thing I said is, when he was indicted, can we come in and talk? Not needed. You're not needed. Sometimes it happens. We get it. But the point we put out in our sentencing memorandum is the efforts that Tom went there, Your Honor. He, with civil attorneys, went to an interview with Porter Wright. Your Honor, he factually said everything that he did. What Mr. Caceres says he's lying about is, at the time, he had no idea that it was illegal what he did. He said, absolutely, I bought an RV. Absolutely, I went to Florida. Absolutely, he believed that he didn't commit any wrongdoing. Not many times would a criminal attorney allow someone to go in and tell factually what they did, because he admitted to everything. He made the government's job extra easy. He admitted to every factual situation that occurred. And he told them, yes, I did this, or no, I didn't do that. So when you say lying, Your Honor, he didn't appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions when he went into the initial meeting with Porter Wright. He didn't understand the criminality, and he had civil attorneys going in there with him. But what's important, Your Honor, is he continued to say, I will meet any time, any place. I met with the Attorney General's office as well as his civil attorney before Mr. Caceres and this group was ever involved. We sat down with them. Hey, what are the framework for coming in and talking? Then they did it. We came in and talked with Tom, Your Honor, without a proffer letter. We came in and talked without a Garrity letter, with Garrity protection. Because he said, no, factually, these are the things that I did. He then realized what was wrong with him. He then realized the criminality of his acts, and he still went in and admitted to each and every aspect factually, Your Honor. That is continuing the part of him taking responsibility, him showing the remorse of, I did wrong, I don't care. I'm not going to go hide behind a Castigar letter. I don't need a proffer letter to talk to that. It's not saying that this didn't occur. It did occur, and he realizes the criminal actions of his nature. Remember, the government has a script all along here that somehow Tom should be, punished X amount more than Mr. Bell and Mr. Fingerhut. I trust the court to treat them similarly situated, Your Honor. I have mentioned again, Your Honor, that good people sometimes do bad things. That's the case here. He has no record. These circumstances will never occur again, Your Honor. He's unemployed at this point. I'm not sure if Mr. Caceres didn't read that in the PSI, but he's unemployed. And it's a situation in which he has no means at this point to pay individually for that. He will pay any fine the court asks. He will do whatever the court asks him to do in terms of restitution, Your Honor. We ask you to treat him fairly, and I know the court will, and treat him as the conspiracy acts. I appreciate your time, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, with, Mr. Presley, who represents the zoo, who desires to speak.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please, the court. Fred Presley here from Porter Wright, Morris, and Arthur. And briefly, Your Honor, I just want to set the record straight for Your Honor's consideration. Since none of the lawyers here participated in the interviews that Porter Wright did or that Plant Moran did, I just wanted to correct a few things. First of all, Mr. Stalf did not admit everything that he is guilty of here today to the Porter Wright team during these interviews. He was confronted about the unbid contract for the Wilds, Straker Lodges at the Wilds. It was a $2 million unbid contract that went to Meade Corporation. Okay, he did not admit to any guilt regarding that and why that was handed out to Meade Corporation. Meade provided him with airplane rights to the Masters Golf Tournament and also to the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball games where he sat in the front row. Okay, enjoyed that. In addition, Your Honor, Mr. Stalf never admitted to purchasing the RV for $45,000. That was something that was going to be for the zoo premises. What he told the Porter Wright team is that, well, I don't like staying in lodges. I'd rather just, sleep in an RV. It was for personal use. And with respect to the tax allegations that he didn't know the taxes were due, basically we had the testimony of Greg Bell, who was the CFO, who told him about the Columbus Dispatch trip, that he had to take taxes out regarding that, and he told Mr. Bell, if you did that to me, you would be fired. So as part of the intimidation that's been testified to and talked about by the prosecutor's office and also by the Columbus City. And looking at all this, he also failed to mention that at the Schottenstein Center, not only did he have the Columbus Zoo have a box, he had a separate box for his son's basketball team that the zoo paid for, okay? Or for the box at the Great American Ballpark for his family, when confronted with a picture of his family being at that event, and realized and responded like, oh, I don't know who paid for it. Did you ever pay for it, Mr. Stalf? No. So from that standpoint, Your Honor, I do not see any type of contrition from the standpoint of us who conducted this investigation, and we're surprised by the pointing fingers even at Jack Hanna, who had nothing to do with this. No evidence of this. No evidence of board members knowing about this. No evidence of board members approving the purchase of his, the rental of his father-in-law staying in the Frobisher property. Did not go to anybody else. And for the record, Your Honor, the evidence establishes that the Columbus Zoo remodeled the Frobisher property before his in-laws got in there with zoo funds and money. Thank you, Your Honor, for your time.
Nice.
Thank you.
And Mr. Stalf, anything you would like to say?
I take full responsibility of my criminal actions, and I want to apologize to the community, to the courts, and especially to my family.
Thank you. In thinking about what to do, and considering all the remarks offered here, plus information in the pre-sentence report, that report indicates Mr. Stalf is living in Ostrander, holds a bachelor's degree, he's 56 years old. The report reminds us of sentences imposed on other persons involved. The report says we have no jail time credit in our case. The report describes the offenses from January of 2011 until August of 2021. Mr. Stalf, working individually and with others, engaged in a scheme, the report says, to defraud the zoo of some $2.2 million. Mr. Stalf was, of course, the CEO at the zoo. Money from the zoo was spent for personal or family uses, including concert tickets, sporting event tickets, golf club memberships at Kinsale and Wedgwood, trips to other places, clothing and sports equipment, meals, beverages, alcohol, electronics, furniture, vehicles, suites, and special seats at Nationwide Arena and Schottenstein Center. Mr. Stalf, the pre-sentence report says, changed the coding on some paperwork, so it appeared that items were used for promotional support given to donors and board members. He used the zoo's barter system, exchanging tickets to the zoo for credits to spend at other vendors, allowing him to go to sporting events or on trips. There were some billing invoices that were falsified, and money used to pay for personal expenses. Mr. Stalf left the zoo in 2021, the report says. As we've heard, Mr. Stalf's own statement in the pre-sentence report reads, in part, I became involved in these offenses by approving contracts that involved event tickets. I attended some events and approved invoices for events that I attended and others attended. I did not pay taxes on a safari trip that I was asked to attend. I understand that I made bad decisions, and I am truly sorry for my mistakes, poor judgments, and my activity. Mr. Stalf's prior record is in the pre-sentence report. I see one DUI or OVI type of offense conviction in Illinois, 2005. And Mr. Stalf, the report says, did successfully complete a supervision period at that court in Illinois. Mr. Stalf reports being the parent of children ages 22, 19, and 11. He says he earned his bachelor's degree in biology and zoology at Western Illinois University. He's not working now, he says. He left his most recent job at Germain Honda because of court proceedings, he says. And information about the restitution obligation is listed in the report. I did read the state's sentencing memo filed here on October 8th. Thank you for that. The report provides some additional information about some of the offenses. You see, it certainly took some significant effort by auditors and others to sort through exactly what had happened. I read to a letter from the current CEO at the zoo, Mr. Schmidt, describing some of the effects on the zoo and zoo staff team members of the activities at issue in this and other related cases. Thank you for that. And I read as well the defendant's sentencing memo that was filed here on October 10. Thank you for that. Documents of interest attached to it. Did read through those. There are attachments too, showing copies of checks paid to different entities, including the IRS. Thank you for all those. I saw too the motion filed here earlier this month by counsel for the zoo concerning the restitution issue and timing of any payment. Thank you. I've looked too at the recidivism and seriousness factors that apply in a felony case. A factor that suggests recidivism is more likely is the history of criminal convictions, so I certainly recognize the type of traffic-related conviction not of any consequence in this type of case. A factor that suggests recidivism is not as likely includes the lack of any juvenile delinquency record. Factors that made this a more serious case include, as we've heard, the serious economic harm that was caused, the fact that Mr. Stalf held a position of trust, the fact, of course, that his relationship with the victim facilitated the offense, and the fact that these offenses were part of what can rightly be described as organized criminal activity. The computerized risk assessment tool put Mr. Stalf in the low-risk category for likelihood of reoffending. After thinking about these things, I'll impose a sentence as follows. First, of course, as Mr. Caceres notes, the offenses do not merge. They do involve different criminal acts committed on different dates. On the lesser included offense of count 1, with that lesser offense being a second-degree felony, aggravated theft offense, the parties agreed that the offense date was before March 22nd, 2019, so the Reagan-Tokes Act does not apply. I will impose on that second-degree felony charge a definite prison term of 7 years. On count 7, a third-degree felony tampering with records offense, a prison term of 24 months is imposed. Likewise, on count 8, again, a third-degree felony tampering with records offense, a 24-month prison term is imposed. On count 19, a fifth-degree felony tampering with records offense, a 12-month prison term is imposed. On count 21, a fourth-degree felony tampering with records offense, a 12-month prison term is imposed. A fifth-degree felony tampering with records offense in count 22 prompts me to impose a 12-month prison term. Count 23 is a fourth-degree felony tampering with records offense. I'll impose a 12-month prison term. With records offense, a 12-month prison term. This is a fifth-degree felony tampering with records offense. A 12-month prison term is imposed. Count 28 is also a fifth-degree felony tampering with records offense. A 12-month prison term is imposed. Count 31, a fourth-degree felony tampering with records offense. A 12-month prison term is imposed. Count 38 is a fourth-degree felony tampering with records offense, and a 12-month prison term is imposed. Count 42 is a fifth-degree felony tampering with records offense, and a 12-month prison term is imposed. And count 82 is the second-degree felony conspiracy offense. Yeah, the parties agreed the offense date was 19, so the Reagan-Tokes Act does not apply on that one. A definite prison term of 7 years is imposed. And on the amended count 84, with the amended charge being a third-degree felony telecommunications fraud charge of 24. These prison terms are imposed concurrently, so the aggregate prison term in 4 days. Restitution amount now owed in addition to any amount earlier paid. $10,000, excuse me, 65 cents. It's owed variously to Columbus Zoo, Internal Revenue Service, and the Ohio Department of Taxation. I trust that the government will provide to the clerk and the proper accounting of just where any restitution that is paid should be directed by the clerk. I know, as I noted, that the zoo has asked that I set a particular date for any restitution payments. My challenge on that is I really don't have any enforcement mechanism when I impose a prison term. If somebody doesn't pay by a set date, there's nothing I can do that I'm aware of. I've sentenced a person and I have no further jurisdiction to take action. So I'm inclined in the case to simply set the restitution amount. I don't think it's disputed in the case, but in terms of the timing, parties to discuss if they want, and certainly any victims can for collecting restitution, but I'm not inclined to set a particular date for payments. I will impose a fine in the case. I do find that Mr. Stalf does have the ability to pay a fine. I'll set a fine on the lesser included offense under count 1. Mr. Stalf must pay the court costs in his case, plus the state required fees. Victims in Ohio. Fine obligations, I would allow him to perform community. Fine bills could be reduced at a rate at least equal to the federal minimum wage for each hour. Be eligible for earned credit, but he would not necessarily receive it. He might therefore be required to spend the full period of time in prison that I'm imposing today. While serving the prison terms in the case, Mr. Stalf might be eligible for judicial release. If he were eligible and if he did apply, I'm sure my successor would consider such a request, but that person would not necessarily grant any judicial release request, so Mr. Stalf might be required to spend the full period of time in prison that I'm imposing. At the end of his time in prison, Mr. Stalf will be placed under post-release control supervision for not less than 18 months and for perhaps as long as 3 years. Adult parole authority. Post-release control is mandatory in 7.28b. During the post-release control period, Mr. Stalf will be supervised by a parole officer and must comply with that person's directions and the law in general. If during the post-release control period, Mr. Stalf were to violate the requirements of post-release control supervision as explained to him by his parole officer, he could be returned to prison for an additional 9 months for any one violation, and for all his violations, a total period of time equal to half of the total sentence that he'd earlier served in the case. And if Mr. Stalf did commit a new felony offense during the post-release control period, he could, of course, be punished for that new felony wherever it was committed, and he could be returned to prison in connection with this case, too. The additional prison term that he could face in this case would last for a period of time equal to the number of days still left on the post-release control period at that point, or 1 year, whichever of those was greater. And that additional prison term in this case would be imposed consecutive to, being of course stacked on top of, any penalty imposed on Mr. Stalf for that new felony offense itself. That's all.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. And you want immediate enforcement, correct? And in terms of the fine, Your Honor, can you put in the entry that wouldn't affect his books or commissary while at the institution?
I typically don't do that.
Okay.
People are always free to ask, but it's not a routine thing that I do here.
Understood, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm sure David will.
Oh, Dave, always says something.
Colin says he'll talk to us.
It's Colin. Or something. Oh, you know. I don't know if you remember me, Dean Narcissus. So, are you here for tax purposes, the fact that it's Franklin County that's involved, or no? Not that long ago.